Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fenske. Artist Mark Tatulli announced earlier this year that he was handing off his comic strip, Heart of the City. The decision surprised a lot of people. Tatulli is the strip's creator. He's been at its helm for all 22 years it's been syndicated. But the Funny Pages favorite isn't going away. Instead, a new artist is taking over, and she lives right here in St. Louis. Christina Stewart is better known as Steenz. The Washington Post reports that she's one of the only African-American women in charge of a strip that runs in so-called mainstream newspapers. It's quite a coup, and it's all the more impressive because Steenz is only 29 years old. And so joining us today to talk about her new ownership of this long-running strip is Steenz. Steenz, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you guys?
Now, I understand you didn't originally seek out to take over Heart of the City. They approached you. What was your reaction when they reached out and mentioned this opportunity?
At first, I was a little surprised because I don't really know anyone in the comic strip industry. I'm definitely more in the comic book industry and graphic novels. So at first, I was like, how did you even find me? But after she started talking about it, I was like, you know what? I should give this a try because I think it's something that I would really like doing.
And in fairness to your note of humility there, I understand they found you because you had illustrated this graphic novel and you'd won a major award for doing this. And, you were starting to get some real attention for your art. But it is still a big difference to go from graphic novels to a comic strip. Can you tell us a little bit about that change?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with graphic novels and comic books, you're always thinking about the larger story, and each page doesn't have to stand on its own, But with comic strips, every single strip has to be standalone. Every strip has to have a punchline at the end, and all the while, there has to be an overarching story that goes from, beginning of the week to end of the week. So it's definitely a lot more about puzzling and figuring out how to put this story together.
And trying to put it together in such a succinct format. I mean, basically, you're dealing with 3 panels. I guess sometimes you can maybe go to 4, but it's so short.
It's super short. I mean, I've been known to cheat a little and go to like 4 or 5 by playing with the paneling, but I think that comes from my background in graphic novels is being able to use the page how I want it. And so I'm trying to find a way to bring that into strips as well. You can do more than just 3 boxes. Let's get creative.
Now, before they reached out to you for this, had you been much of a reader of the comic strips?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up reading comic strips. Those were the first comics I ever read. I was reading Jumpstart and Curtis and Kathy and, Peanuts, all the good classics. And it's really kind of surreal to see that I'm going to be in papers as well,
Yeah, I mean, here you are. You've got this thing that was almost handed to you that it's such a big deal. I mean, people work their whole life to get a strip into syndication. I imagine you probably had a different idea of how you thought your life was going to play out. You went to Maryville University. What did you study when you were there?
So I studied studio art. And while I was there, I did kind of have a focus on illustration. But, I find this happens a lot to art students. They give you the tools to hone your craft. But when it comes to actually putting it in action out in the workforce, that's when you start asking yourself questions. What am I actually going to do with this? So that kind of leads to why I jumped around a lot, worked at a comic book store, library, publisher, and, all the while I'm still drawing. So yeah, the direction isn't very linear for sure.
So, and as you mentioned, you were working at Star Clipper. That's obviously one of the top comic stores here in town. I understand it's while you were there that you saw Brittany Williams' name on the Samurai Jack comment. Why was that an important moment for you to find her work?
Yeah, so, I really do believe that, as corny as it sounds, seeing is believing. It never really occurred to me that I could make comics. I never thought in my head, oh, I can't make comics. That's not something I want to do. It just was never an idea that came to my mind. And I think a large part of why that is true is because I never actually saw people who looked like me doing those comics, you know? And so the second one I saw her name on there, I recognized her because I was following her online. I was like, wait a second, she's a Black woman. She's making comics. I can do that too. And finally, like, it kind of clicked for me. So I'm really happy that I'm getting the notoriety that I have so that I can kind of be the same thing for other Black comic creators.
So that moment when you realized this is something she was doing, was that when you gave yourself permission to explore this in a more ambitious way?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I was doing, small illustrations and just kind of playing around with art. But after I saw that, I really got into working with the local art group, Ink and Drink Comics. So they do an anthology of comics every season based on a genre of comics. So Westerns, romance, horror, all of that. And we all work together to put these comics in a book that we sell. And then once it sells, we use that money to create the next one. So it's a really great community. And it was after I actually visualized myself making comics that I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this.
That's so cool. And I'm so glad you gave yourself the permission to do this. And, it's obviously led to, you're walking right through that door and at such a young age. But I wonder if with that, there just comes this sense of responsibility. Like now you feel like you can't just be Steenz. You also have to be Steenz, the role model for younger girls who might be in that same situation you were in.
I know.
Is that scary?
Yeah, it's a little scary. Yeah, it's terrifying, actually. I mean, I remember when I was looking up, information about other comic strip artists, and I've always had a really soft spot in my heart for Jackie Orms. Like, I have her portrait like tattooed on my arm. She was the first Black female cartoonist, and so I was like, you know what? I need to find out like who else is out there doing syndicated comic strips. And, I knew of Barbara Brandon Croft because I was reading, where I'm coming from. And I knew that my friend Bianca Eunice was also doing it. She just got syndicated with 6 Chicks. And then I was like, okay, who else? And that was it.
There was so no one else.
Yeah. So
wow.
The fact that it's just like the 3 of us is kind of daunting,
that seems extremely daunting. I mean, the 3 of you, have you formed like a text group where you can like buck each other up? I mean, that seems really scary.
Yeah, actually, like I just got into like an email thread with the both of them, and I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. I'm actually talking to the Barbara Brandon Croft.
That's
she's
awesome.
a real person.
And I'm sure she's very excited though to know that there is one more. I mean, if there's only 3 of you, that seems like that is a huge. You're a 33% increase just by showing up.
I know. And it's really interesting because, I was telling her about, how fortunate I am to be working with Andrews McMeel Syndication on this. And Bianca was talking about how she's working with, I believe it's King Features. And Barbara was like happy to see that we were putting our names out there and actually doing it, because when she was pitching where I'm coming from, both Andrews McMeel and King Features denied her. So the fact that the 2 other, Black women are doing it to companies that denied her, 30 years ago is, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, that's good to see that turnaround. So tell us a little bit about Heart of the City. For people who aren't familiar with this strip, what's the idea, the organizing conceit?
So it's about Hart Lamar. She is a middle schooler now. She lives in Philly, and she lives with her single mother, and she has her 2 friends, Dean and Kat, and it's really about her being a precocious young girl wanting to have fame and fortune and be the center of attention. And so when I took it over, I decided I was going to add another character. I wanted to make sure that Hart had more friends of color, considering she lives in, the city, and that's what the world looks like.
Yeah, she's living in Philly. I mean, that's a city a lot like St. Louis. You wouldn't expect anybody living there would have friends that were all white.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things that I wanted to really step into with this new comic, is bring that, diversity to the forefront, because it's always there in real life. So it should be there reflected in comics as well. So the direction that I'm taking it is definitely more focused on her middle school issues and adventures. Before it was definitely about, her being a young girl, and young girls can be silly and kind of eccentric. And I want to be able to keep that theme at the heart, but just move it more towards now she's a middle schooler and things are going to change.
So she's growing up a little bit.
Yeah. And she's grown up since Mark Tatulli had been creating it. When it first started, I believe she was like 6 years old. And so over those 22 years, she has grown up. So now that she's a middle schooler, I'm like, okay, now we can get into some really interesting storylines. That's not just, kids being kids,
That's such a heavy time for girls. I think there's a lot you can explore if you feel like the newspapers are ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely feel very fortunate to be working with Andrew McNeil, my editor, Sheena Wolf, over there, because she's allowing me to do pretty much anything with this story. We're going to talk about friendships and how to actually be a good friend to somebody, and gender and relationships and family dynamics, all that sort of stuff, all wrapped in, little humorous vignettes.
And so this is the first week where your panels have been running instead of Mark Tatulli, the creator. That's obviously a huge moment. You've released this work upon the world. What kind of reaction are you getting to it?
A lot of negative.
Oh, no.
Well, that's another thing I didn't really know about the comic strip industry compared to the comics industry. With comics, I feel like everyone knows everyone, and we're all kind of like buying each other's work and really kind of being very supportive about comics and getting things out there. But comic strips, people are very set in their ways,
People get used to it being that, it's been the same guy for 22 years.
Exactly. So, my first week has not been the best week, but I definitely have been seeing a lot of support, though, and I am very happy that people are, open to seeing this change, because I'm not making an entirely new comic. I'm adapting one that's been going on for 20 years, so I can understand where the hesitation comes from, but, there's hesitation and then there's outright mean,
Yeah, and I hope there won't be more of that. That sounds awful. But I will say I looked at your first week of strips and I think they look great. And we're going to include a link to them within our post about this interview. That'll be at stlpublicradio.org if people want to go check those out. And maybe leave some encouragement for Steenz, because I think you are off to a great start and I'm so excited to see where this is going to go.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Well, Steenz, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know that there's even bigger things coming for you. So I hope you'll stay in touch as this strip takes off and your career continues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. That's 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.